Nate Venarski here. Today I'm going to be identifying crab spiders with y'all and hopefully imparting some tips and tricks for how to identify these guys across the world. I am specifically using photos in iNaturalist that have the CC by NC license, just to avoid using uh, some of the licenses that are, um, for instance, all rights reserved. I don't want to be posting their stuff without permission. So jumping right into this, this is an oxytate of some sort. Oxytate are extremely difficult to confidently ID, so I typically skip over those. Bassiana, Bassaniana. This is going to be my first time saying some of these names out loud. This is a difficult genus, and I can show you why here. So, when we go to this genus within the United States, you have three species. You have Bassaniana versicolor, Bassaniana utahensis, and Bassaniana floridana. So floridana is the easiest one of these to identify. I'll just kind of show you each of their ranges. So floridana is a southeast endemic. It's typically kind of brownish, and you'll typically find, well, all these characters can vary. It's got these dark marks at the back of the carapace, and they kind of meet in the middle versus if you were to take a female of Bassaniana utahensis, you have these dark marks here and they're separated by a white space. But almost everything else about these spiders is variable. They also have some sexual dimorphism going on. That's a female, that's a male, female and male. Males are darker, usually more uniform color. And the tricky thing is one, you can see what's the difference between these two spiders. There isn't any. The difference between a male Bassiana versicolor and a male Bassaniana utahensis, they differ only in genitalia, and it's a very subtle difference. And also, they hybridize. They hybridize about kind of in the sort of Michigan through Vermont range. You'll start to see hybrids, and many of these points, like here, that's probably almost certainly. I'd just go here and push that back to genus. It's probably versicolor based on the range. Um, but you can't really tell that for sure. Um, and then in versicolor, its range is kind of the eastern U.S. and it kind of stops where Utensis range starts. So you can see, and all over here, those are unverified observations and people just trusting the computer vision, which can't tell these apart. So no one other than an expert with a microscope can tell these apart. Females is the same story. The females of versicolor, look like that, and the females of Utahensis look like that. How do you tell those apart? And they vary. The variation between the species is probably greater than the variation within the species is probably greater than the variation between the species. And then Bassaniana floridana, you can tell it from the other two by appearance, but the males of Bassaniana floridana, their palps are the same, their genitalia are the same as Utahensis. And so there are records in the literature of Utahensis from these Gulf coastal states. I think those are misidentifications of floridana. Um, Anyway, all that to say, I'm not going to touch this one. It probably is versicolor because it's uh, is dark blackish instead of brownish, and it's in versicolor's range. But I just prefer not to touch those for now. Zysticus cristatus, common crab spider, commonly misidentified all throughout California. It's not present in California, but the computer vision on a naturalist constantly suggests it here, and people pick it because the common name is common crab spider. Um, it's a European species. If we look at the map, that's where it's native is Europe. I think maybe parts of Asia. Most of these are misidentifications, though. And then in the United States, it's introduced in this Pacific Northwest region. You can identify it by It's got a decently unique abdominal marking when paired with the carapace markings, but many Zysticus look like this too, so they're difficult to tell apart. There are like 50 plus Zysticus species in the United States, and we only know what half of them look like in life. Most of them we only know from written descriptions of preserved specimens. There's another one of those species. That's the male. This probably is the correct identification, but I don't usually weigh in on this particular one. This one is probably the Sticus funestris, the sad ground crab spider. Um, and that's because if it's a uniformly mottled orangish brown color, it seems to be unique among Zysticus, at least in the eastern United States. Another cristatus. Okay, this is a hot button issue that I will probably not comment on. Um, Thymisis in South Africa are difficult to identify, especially without a clear photo of the male palp and without other, clearer photo than this. But people identify it as species and get upset when I push it back to genus. So I leave South Africa alone for the most part nowadays. Um, this is a fun one. Missimenops inners. This was a spider species that was described by Walkenmeyer from drawings by John Abbott, who was a Revolutionary War veteran who did watercolor drawings of spiders and shipped them over to Europe. Um, and this is it belonged to the genus Mechaphessa, but it's been left in the genus Missimenops because it was for a long time considered, and still is technically considered, nomina dubia. So, or a nomen dubium is the correct singular of that, um, because the original drawing of it was lost, but it's recently been rediscovered in a museum in Paris. Um, okay, that's another photo of the same spider pair, and yeah, I can't identify those two species from that photo. Another Bassaniana versicolor, likely the case, but I'm going to ignore that. Thymisis anustis. This is the only Thymisis crab spider in Europe outside of potentially, I guess this is Asia, Turkey. Um, and this is a unique spider, so it's a really cool looking one. You can identify it one by the range, but also by a combination of its ocular tubercles, abdominal tubercles, and then long legs with dark bands on the tarsi or on the tibia. Um, here's a cysticus. Can't identify that beyond genus, but it is a male, so I'll go ahead and annotate that. There's another Zysticus. So you can tell Zysticus from Bassaniana. They're pretty similar, but Zysticus will have a patterned carapace. So you see here this carapace, or basically the head region, you have a light stripe flanked by two darker stripes. In Bassaniana, you will have a uniformly dark, or if you do have a light stripe, it's very, very faint. Um, close out those. Back to identifying Mechaphisa aspirata. Yeah, first time saying some of these. This is a unique Mechaphisa because of the size of its pedipalps. It's the only Mechaphisa in the eastern United States that has pedipalps this large. In fact, I think it's the only one outside of California and Arizona as well. There are two other species that have pedipalps like that, and you see there's these disjunct populations in Colorado. That's Mechaphisa aspirata utaensis. It was a subspecies in the literature. Got lumped back under aspirata. I think it deserves specific status, in my opinion. But I haven't examined any specimens, and I'm not an expert, so my opinion is not worth all that much. This is a Maris species from Europe, and all I can do is agree with the genus there. Another Zysticus. Okay, so this one is just identified as Themisidae, and because it is kind of light colored, kind of a yellowish white color, and it's got these hairs on it, then that means which are they're spine-like seedy, that makes it Mecaphysa. And in California, there are like 14 species or something like that that we know of, potentially more undescribed. And they're best identified by dissection. There are a few that you can identify from photos, but most you can't. An interesting ecological note is in Mecaphysa, because they're so hairy, you do often see pollen stuck to them. So I'm going to go ahead and add an annotation, pollen on body. Uh, there's another, this is correctly put in the Misceminini by the CV, um, and that's probably Mecaphysa because it's got these dark markings on the abdomen, which you won't see in Missumesis, which is the other crab spider that has males that kind of have these long legs and an overall light body color. So Misceminavadia, this is a kind of the quintessential crab spider. They're one of the larger crab spider species. They're very widespread. You find them all across Europe, Asia, North America, down into New Mexico and Appalachia. They can change color from white to yellow. I've seen some that are almost all red. And yeah, they're pretty cool little critters. So another Misceminini in California. This is probably a Mecaphysa, although yeah, there really isn't anything else that will have those markings on the abdomen and this overall body color in California. The sickest species ID in Europe is beyond my knowledge. This is what the male of Miss Minavadia looks like. So you saw earlier, that's the female. This is the male. Males are a lot smaller than the females, and they can be identified just because they're very unique. They got this dark color to the carapace and legs. Sometimes they'll be like a inky blue color. Um, a very neat species. Here's another Mecaphysa aspirata. So you can't really get a good look at the palp size from this uh, photo, but the time of year is pretty typical for this species. If you look at its phenology graph or seasonality, I guess phenology is probably not the right word. You see that there are a good number of them in early spring to early summer, and then there's a dip in how many are observed, and then they peak in September. And that peaking in September uh, is mostly juvenile males. Well, it looks like there's more females annotated here, but from what my observation, it's a lot of juvenile males are emerging, overwintering, so you don't see them as much when they're dormant. Then they're coming out in spring, mating and laying eggs. The females are, and then those eggs are hatching and maturing. And by the time fall comes around, you have a bunch of the juveniles ready to overwinter. You can compare that in contrast to other members of the genus, which is a really cool genus, a lot of diversity, um, like Mecaphysa celer. Let's go. Yeah, I've got to go to the complex. Um, so comparing that, you see it has this big peak at one point of the year, and it's just downhill from there. The other thing is the range of these species is different. So uh, Mecaphysa celer has a very interesting range. So you'll find it almost everywhere in the United States. It's actually common throughout Wyoming, Utah, Nevada, Idaho, Oregon. It's just there are a bunch of species like Mecaphysa lepida that are just indistinguishable, um, that that occur in these areas, and so not many are identified as species here. Um, but there's this huge gap along the Mississippi River and then up here into Kentucky, Indiana, Illinois, Ohio, where it's just not present for whatever reason. And then when we look at, we'll go back to Aspirata and its range map. You can see it's very common throughout there, and it's also, its range, it goes probably over into Arizona. It does not go into California, and then it's up through Canada down here into Washington and Oregon, and it seems to mostly skip out this general area. Um, but why? This has puzzled me for a long time. Why is the range like this? I don't understand. There's some biogeography that I'm not getting because um, this is forest. This is the Great Plains. Why is one species here and here? I think maybe part of it, there might be multiple species at play. The Mechaphesiceller complex is one of the most taxonomically difficult ones out there. Um, and if you look at this, so you can kind of see here's the Black Belt, here's the Jackson Prairie, here's the pine savannas. There are prairies up in here as well that like Habitat Area is documenting. So it makes me think maybe this is taking advantage of kind of the grasslands and pine savannas and prairies over in the southeast. Um, and maybe that's why it's not up in like West Virginia and such. But you also like you see these are reliable. I've double checked most of these, at least fairly recently. Uh, okay, that's actually Esperanto. Right. Look, I misidentified that. Um, I misled you. Uh, yeah, that's just a juvenile aspirata. They're difficult to tell from cellar. Cellar will have distinctly four dots here on the dorsal front of the abdomen, and the dots will form like a trapezoid that's wider in front. Let me see if maybe I can pull up a picture of that. Yeah, so that's typically what you're going to see with Mechaphesa celer. Um, so I was wrong there. Let's see. So maybe it isn't really in the Appalachians. Let's see. Any of these worth looking at? That's probably missing Minops centers, but difficult to say. Um, yeah, so here is Mechaphisa celer. Um, that's a white form. I'm pretty sure the aspirata just never looks like this. I didn't make this research grade because I'm not 100% sure, but I also didn't disagree with the ID because I think that it is probably right. Okay, back to identifying here. So this is Megaphasa aspirata. The males. Actually, I'm going to go ahead and edit the photos here because it's not really showing um, a mature male up here. So I'll just put that there. I've gotten so this is the immature male, and they've got these big swollen unhardened palps, and once it matures, then those palps are they're hardened and more differentiated. Um, but you can see the same carapace and bands and abdominal markings are all present here. So that's what that is. Oh, the other thing is Mechaphisa aspirata is more of a forest plant, a forest spider. So you're more likely to find it on an oak or a tree or a shrub than Mechaphisa celer, which you're more likely to find on herbaceous plants like rudbeckia or grasses and such. The Stichus ferox, this is just constantly misidentified. I'm just going to leave that one alone. This is probably celer. This is a Basaniana. This is probably an undescribed one because it's in Mexico. And most of the crab spiders in Mexico are undescribed. Um, the Stichus in Europe, but that's a really pretty photo of Basaniana, and that almost looks like it's covered in pollen. It might be some other particulate matter. These typically are under bark and on human structures and on the ground rather than on flowers. Um, that is Missimina vadia. And when you get up into this part of the Pacific Northwest, there's really not much else it could be in terms of a yellow spider. That is Zysticus. That was 30, or we reviewed 15 out of 30 of about 96,000 uh, observations that have this license. When you take it off that license, it's a lot more. It's like 160,000 or something like that. So a lot to go. But I'll do one more page and then I'll call it a night. That is Confess a Seller. And that's because of those four dots, which is widest uh, in front. That rule kind of falls out as you get past this part of Texas westward. There are some like Megaphisa lepida, Megaphisa californica that have that same kind of pattern to them. Ascysticus. That is probably Megaphisa celer. There's a Basaniana from Mexico. That's a Stickus. And you can kind of tell the difference. So this one, it looks like it's lighter in the middle, but that's just because of a reflection. But over here, you can see, even though there is a reflection here, you also have these paired markings here. You won't hardly ever have markings on a Basaniana carapace. That is Missiminops inners. You can tell by the overall pattern and especially by those dark prolateral markings on the distal tibia. That could be Zysticus punctatus. The males are kind of hard to ID. That is no telling what that is. It is a spider. It's not a crab spider. It's a molt. So unidentification is probably not possible beyond this. There's a Stickus. So for some reason, the computer vision likes to call a lot of spiders Missiminoides formosipes. The white-banded crab spider, this is Megaphisa celer. These formosipes, you typically are going to see that in summer, August, September, and it's a larger spider. They have this white line underneath the eyes, and they have this ridge above the eyes, or kind of in the middle of the eye region. That's called a carina. And then the males also have this white line in carina as well. And the males are also very distinctive with green and totally black legs. Yeah, that's Coriarachne brunipes. It looks a lot like Basaniana. It's a longer body, flatter body, darker legs that are not as variegated, and it's a lot less common. You can see it's really restricted to California. I think this is a new record in Colorado. I don't think it was recorded in the literature there previously, but from what I recall, that is in fact correct. Yeah, that's just there's no doubt that that's what that is. So you find on iNaturalist, you find range extensions all the time. But compare that to any of the Bassaniana, which have basically continental ranges. It's a very restricted range species. Although it probably does kind of range all the way up here too. There's just no one in, like Fort Chipewyan, Canada, who is taking pictures of crab spiders. That is a Stickus within the tribe Coriarachnini. Mouthful. That is Cynema globosum. You can tell by its distinct pattern on the abdomen, although there are a lot of very similar species as you move into Eastern Europe and Central Asia. that are very difficult to tell apart. Um, that looks like so it looks like Zysticus texanus, but I think based on the range, it's Zysticus bicuspidus. Um, Although theoretically, I guess it could be either one. But this is one of the few Zysticus species that's really kind of um, easy to identify, or it stands out from the abdominal pattern, that white bar and white bars in front of it that are kind of broken, and then also the legs with these kind of chubby segments, and then darker at the distal, especially a really dark tibia. There's another Mechaphessus celer. There's Vadia. That looks like it could be an Ozyptilla, but I'll put that at tribe instead. So the Coriarachnini has a bunch of these like ground crab spiders, they're called, that are brown and drab and stick against the ground. They can be very difficult to identify. Um, Here's another one. Yeah, this is probably Zysticus, but there are a couple other species or genera this could be. That's either, because this is in Florida, so this is either Mechaphessus celer, which I lean towards, um, or is Misumenops bluus, which is just a beautiful species. Let me see if I can pull it up for you. Um, there's the male. There's one color form of the female, another color form of the female, uh, another color form of the female. They just have a bunch of different color forms. It is, uh, I think it is endemic to Florida and Georgia. Um, there are people who say it's native to parts of the Caribbean. I think that that's based on some is based on some old literature that is not very accurate. Um, and in my opinion, this is probably an undescribed species of Misumenops. These, there's no way that that's Misumenops ballus. That's just someone making an ID that is just wildly incorrect. Yeah, that's Misumenops inners, which should be a Mechaphisa. So Misumenops was like kind of like a taxon that was used to throw a bunch of species in that are not related. So Misumenops, in the narrow sense, is a species that is a genus that is endemic to South America, the Caribbean, Florida and Georgia, and then up into probably around this area in Mexico. All of the north of Florida are Misumenops inners, which is really Mechaphisa, just awaiting revision. All of these in Africa are, quote, Misumenops rubidecoratus, which is not a Misumenops at all. It seems to be closest to Henricksinia, which is an Asian species, Asian genus. And then you've got some Misumenops up in like Kyrgyzstan and China. The Misumenops in China need to be transferred to Ebertella. The Misumenops in Kyrgyzstan probably need their own genus. Um, there's a Misumenops in the Philippines that's like a Tallini or something totally unrelated. And then there's like Misumenops rapiensis or rapiensis or something like that in some of these islands. Um, it's probably related to Latinlegia, Latinenlegia, something like that, which is mostly an Australian genus, but according to several researchers, it's just widespread from New Guinea all the way over to like French Polynesia. Um, anyway, that was a little bit of a rant. Uh, so this is another probably Cynema globosum. This is a variable species, but you can always kind of tell it by it's got this yellow or orange or red base color to the abdomen with this sort of arrowhead mark on the, or almost like a Darth Vader helmet. I'm just now realizing on the abdomen. Um, there's another Misumenops inners. Oh, this is a Syriogonus. Um, Madagascar has some really cool endemic crab spiders, and this is one of them, or one of the genera. They're very difficult to identify. I would guess this is probably Syriogonus rutenbergi, but here I just didn't know how to spell it, so I'll just add a comment. Maybe Syriagunus rutenbergi. The only thing we really have to go off of for Syriagunus rutenbergi is that one of the authors, or one of the people who described this species, he didn't draw it, he just wrote about it. And he said it looks just like this other drawing of a Runcinia from Europe or something like that. And I looked up that drawing, and the drawing, it is not a very accurate drawing to the Runcinia. It's kind of exaggerated, but it looks a whole lot like this. Um, so that's why I think it is Rutenbergi. This is probably Megaphisa dubia, but I'll just leave it at genus. Probably Megaphisa celer. Now there's the Stickus. That is Misumenops spilulus. Very pretty. That is Misumenops inners. You can tell by those dark prolateral bands, prolateral meaning on the front and on the back of the tibia. And on the distal tibia, the distal tibia is the end of the tibia, which is furthest from the spider's center. And the leg segment of the spider, the first one right here, this little small joint is like a coxa. Then you have the femora, then you have the patella, then you have the tibia, and you have the the metatarsus, and then the tarsus. Some authors, as you read older works, they call these things different things. So what do they typically call this? Um, I can't remember, but they'll call these segments, these last two segments, other words, and that can be confusing. Um, all right, that was the end of that page. We reviewed 21 out of 30 observations. We have a lot more to go. I hope that you'll stay tuned with me in the future.